no more fun. Fun's over. No fun on Sunday mornings, all right? Okay, well, before I get started, I just want to recognize some really cool people we have. How about that band, huh? Right? Okay, awesome. And I'm not saying this just because I'm a member of that band, but these guys work really hard. Okay, everyone that serves here works really hard, but these guys are working 10, some of them even like 15 hours a week, getting ready. I don't know if you guys know this, but there's no music stands up. Well, there's one right in front of me, but there's no music stands up here with music on it. These guys memorize their songs. They memorize the notes and the words. And I just think it's totally incredible that they're able to do that as volunteers. So that's pretty awesome. And I also just want to thank Pastor Marty for giving me the opportunity to speak this morning. He is in Ohio. I've been serving with him for 4 years now? Yeah, somewhere around 4 years. I've been serving with Marty, and he is just an amazing man of God, an amazing leader. We all know this move probably wouldn't have gone as well as it did without his amazing leadership. So let's just give him a hand. All right, so for my message today, at least at the beginning, I'm going to take you back to the year 1999. How many of you guys remember this year? So in 1999, I was 10 years old, okay? It makes me feel old. It'll probably make some of you feel even older. I'm sorry. I apologize. So I was 10 years old, and this particular event, I was on vacation with my family. We were there with my family, my aunt's family, and a family friend. And this family friend thought it would be a wonderful idea to bring a raft, this inflatable raft, to the beach. And it wasn't a big one, it was one of those, like a two-seater. And so I was 10, and my little cousin Luke, he was 7. We decided we're going to get in this raft, and we're just going to ride the waves. We were having a blast, like riding the waves and everything. We got a little bit far enough out, like beyond where the waves were kind of breaking. So we're just kind of sitting there chilling. And we're looking at the ocean view, and put our oars down, just kind of relax, right? And we kind of lost track of time, and so we're just looking at the ocean view, and eventually I look back at the beach behind me, and we're a far way away from the beach. We had drifted or what I thought was drifting, a lot, and so there was this dock that came off a little bit further down the beach. And we were just beyond this. It was a really long dock. We were just beyond the edge of the dock. So I said, "All right, Luke, let's start rowing back in." So I get on my side. I start rowing. He's rowing on the other side. And I was expecting this dock to get closer. And we kept rowing. And we kept rowing. And the dock kept getting smaller and further away and smaller and further away. And I'm like, what is this? What is happening? So start to row faster. Start to row faster. Luke starts to row faster. Luke starts to row faster. And this dock is still getting further and further away. And I didn't know this at the time, but we were actually caught in something that's called a riptide. How many of you guys know what this is? Okay, a riptide is, I don't actually know all the technical details, but or how it happens. So you can probably ask one of the WPI students or something here. I actually, a riptide it's a stream of water between 5 and 15 feet wide, and it pulls water out away from the shore. And so and it can move water up to 8 feet per second. So this one was going pretty fast, and they can go up to a mile out. Wow, that's dark. And so they can go up to a mile out. And so this particular riptide, it was still carrying us. And so, I didn't want Luke to realize what was going on. He was young. He's kind of a sensitive kid. And so I was trying to conceal the fact that we kept drifting out. So I was like, just keep rowing, we're almost there. And then he's like, we're getting farther away. And I was like, no, we're not. No, we're not. We're getting closer. And he's like, no, we are. We're getting farther away. And he starts freaking out. He starts having this little kid panic attack. And he's like, we're going to die. And so he puts his oar down, and he's like, I'm done. I can't do this. So I'm like, we are not done. So I picked up the other oar, and I'm doing both. And I'm like, we gotta get back. And this dock is getting further and further away. And by now, the people on the beach are like little ants in the distance. And so The problem was when I was doing the Wolverine rowing thing, my right arm was stronger than my left, so we were just going in circles, and we're still being pulled up by this riptide, right? So eventually I just came to and I'm like, man, I'm tired. So I put the oars down and I'm like, what am I gonna do right now? Like we're so far out, and eventually it occurred to me, there is one thing I have not tried yet. Dad! Dad! At the top of my lungs. And you know how voices carry over water. And my dad would always wear these ridiculous hats to the beach. You know what I'm talking about? Those derby hats? So, and so I could recognize him. I could see him from all the way out. It felt like we were like a half mile out at this point. I don't know, I was young. But I could see him just stand up, and he must have saw us, and he started freaking out. So he just threw the derby off. He's running in. The family friend runs in. My brother runs in, who's 11 at this point. What's he going to do? I'm sorry, Carl, if you're watching this recording. They're all swimming out, and they are going fast, right? Because they're swimming into a riptide. So they're like Michael Phelps on steroids. They're coming out really fast. My brother and the family friend, who's a big guy, they both got cramps on the way out. So my dad is like carrying that like terrible lifeguard etiquette, like just like swimming them out and everything. And they get to the boat, and my dad gets there, and then I'm like, great. Now we have 5 people out here, and this riptide is still carrying us out. Like, what does this solve, right? So my dad's like, you know what? I know how to get out of this. So he's lugging all of us while he does this, but he swims parallel to the beach, like a couple hundred feet, and then we just slowly make our way all the way in. My dad, saved the day. He tugged us all. We made it back to the beach, and everyone was A-okay. So my dad was a hero there. I told him I was going to tell that story last week. It was Father's Day, so I thanked him for that. And that is the reason why I'm here and can still preach with you guys this morning. So later on, after that happened, I kind of realized that there was something that my dad knew that I didn't know about riptides. That you had to swim parallel. By the way, that's how you get out of a riptide. If you're ever stuck in one, remember this message. They swim parallel. Okay. But my dad knew something about riptides that I didn't know. And the truth is, no matter how long I sat there and did the Wolverine paddle into this riptide, it was stronger than me. There was no way that I could get through it. All right. So, but I shouldn't have given up. And there, until my perspective changed, and until I got my dad involved, I wasn't going anywhere. But let's not be too critical of 10-year-old Ryan, because I think we've all experienced a time when we've given up, when a problem seems, way too big and we've given up on it. If you're a parent, or if you've ever assembled toys on Christmas Eve, you guys all know what I'm talking about. Like you start and it's already like 2 a.m. and you're like, all right, let's put this together, and then you're like, man, this isn't working out. You get your spouse involved, and then all of a sudden the sun's coming up, and you're like, this manual is written in Chinese. I can't even read this, and so then you have to explain to little Susie, well, listen, little Susie, I know that, most of your friends that are getting Barbie houses, this Christmas, they're going to have roofs, but me and your mom got you construction zone Barbie house, right? It doesn't have a roof. Look at that little tinfoil hat that Ken is wearing. This is great. Or if you've ever bought furniture from IKEA, you must know what I'm talking about. Listen, I'm Swedish, right? So I'm very proud of my Swedish heritage. I'm half Swedish, actually. And but the bane of my existence is putting together that IKEA furniture. Those you get the label, you get that little book, and it says, Schnugen, Frugen, Bureau, or whatever, and you're trying to put it together, and there's parts missing, and then you get to the very end, and it's like, oh, hey, remember that part that you put in 20 steps ago? Yeah, you put that in backwards, now you have to start over. And I'm like, forget it! I'm going to call Garrett Walker, and he's going to come help me. He's going to help fix this, or I'm going to call my dad, one of the two. And and so we all give up sometimes, and maybe your thing isn't assembly, but we've all given up at one time or another. And it's okay if you give up when you're assembling a toy or a piece of furniture from IKEA, but it's not okay if you give up in your life, right? If you're facing a big problem, there's a problem in your way, it's bigger than you, and you just give up, that's not okay. And I've realized, when we face problems, we kind of do that rowing in circles thing too. And sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we can't beat it. We can't get through it. We can't reach our goal. And it just seems, the problem seems too big. The wall seems too high. We can't climb it. And so you know what we do? I give up. I can't do this. I give up. And, I think that's a pretty universal experience. Now, if you're here and you haven't had one of these situations before, if you've never experienced, hey, I'm going to give up on this, you're probably like 10 years old and you should be in Theater 14 today. No, but you really, I think this is universal. I think if you're sitting there and you're saying in your head, I've never given up on anything, I think you need a little fact check there, all right? So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that if you're an adult sitting in this room, that you've experienced this before, you've given up on something, or you've at least thought strongly about it before. Now, there's this situation in the scriptures where the exact opposite happens, and to be more accurate, there are a lot of situations in the scriptures where the exact opposite happens, where someone will encounter this bigger-than-life problem, and they have no idea how to fix this thing, how to conquer it, and they stare it in the face, they don't give up, and they overcome it. They overcome the problem. And I think this particular story I chose because I think through this character we can find the key to never giving up. To never giving up. When we face a big problem like that, no matter how big it is, I think the key is in here to never giving up on that problem. So the character is Paul, and we're going to read from Acts 14. So here we go. The same thing happened in Iconium. Paul and Barnabas went to the Jewish synagogue and preached with such power that a great number of both Jews and Greeks became believers. Some of the Jews, however, spurned, I love that word, spurned, God's message, and poisoned the minds of the Gentiles against Paul and Barnabas. But the apostles stayed there a long time, preaching boldly about the grace of the Lord. And the Lord proved their message was true by giving them power to do miraculous signs and wonders. But the people of the town were divided in their opinion about them. Some sided with the Jews, and some with the apostles. Here's where it gets bad. Then a mob of Gentiles and Jews, along with their leaders, a mob, that's what they called it, decided to attack and stone them. When the apostles learned of it, they fled to the region of Lycaonia, to the towns of Lystra and Derbe and the surrounding area. And there they preached the good news. All right, so things are going okay in Iconium. You got kind of this half and half spread. Some of the people are really into this whole gospel thing that Paul and Barnabas are preaching. Some of them are really not into it, and they're so not into it, in fact, that they want to attack and they want to kill Paul and Barnabas. So let's continue with verse 8. While they were at Lystra, Paul and Barnabas came upon a man with crippled feet. He had been that way from birth, so he had never walked. He was sitting and listening as Paul preached. Looking straight at him, Paul realized he had faith to be healed. So Paul called to him in a loud voice, "Stand up!" And the man jumped to his feet and started walking. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in their local dialect, "These men are gods in human form." Now this next part reminds me of a part from Return of the Jedi, when the Ewoks, they think that C-3PO is a god. Oh, watch this. They decided that Barnabas was the Greek god Zeus, and that Paul was Hermes, since he was the chief speaker. Now the temple of Zeus was located just outside the town. So the priest of the temple and the crowd brought bulls and wreaths of flowers to the town gates, and they prepared to offer sacrifices to the apostles. So, these weren't Ewoks or whatever, but it kind of reminds me of it. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard what was happening, they tore their clothing in dismay and ran out among the people shouting, "Friends, why are you doing this? We are merely human beings, just like you. We have come to bring you the good news that you should turn from these worthless things and turn to the living God who made heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in them. In the past, he permitted the nations to go their own ways, but he never left them without evidence of himself and his goodness. For instance, he sends you rain and good crops and gives you food and joyful hearts." But even with these words, Paul and Barnabas could scarcely restrain the people from sacrificing to them. So these people are pretty fickle, right? Can I use that word? Or maybe, I don't know if they're fickle, maybe they're just unintelligent, I don't really know. So here's these guys, right? So Paul and Barnabas, let's do a fact check here. They come and they say, okay, there's this God, he's awesome, he created everything, he sent his son Jesus to die on the cross, and you guys have kind of run astray and followed Zeus and Hermes. And so these people, this is their reaction, right? This makes no sense. They're like, oh, I get it, so you're Zeus and Hermes. No, no, that's not who we are. In fact, we're preaching against them. Oh, no, but we're going to offer a sacrifice to you. No, that's not why we're here, right? So they're getting pretty frustrated, and they tear their clothes. We don't really do that anymore. I think it'd be really cool if we did when we get frustrated. Get in the car, kids! Oh! So crazy. So then, all right, let's continue here. But even with these words, Paul and Barnabas could scarcely restrain the people from sacrificing to them. And here's where it gets really bad. This part actually reminds me more of The Empire Strikes Back. It's more like that imperial march. Bum, 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 bum. All right, here we go. Then some Jews arrived from Antioch and Iconium. Now, Iconium, if you remember, was the town that those people that wanted to kill him just were. And they had just kind of escaped from them. All right? So then some Jews arrived from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowds to their side. Now remember, this is a very fickle crowd. They're kind of dumb, so they're pretty easy to kind of, corral and make them do what they want. So, and won the crowds to their side. They stoned Paul and dragged him out of the town. Now this is what Paul and Barnabas feared would happen earlier, that they would get stoned. Now let me tell you something about. I was actually about to say, let me tell you something about getting stoned, but I don't know a lot about that, so that's the only reference I'll make to marijuana, I promise. Maybe I won't promise. But, so this is the thing about in Roman times. It's actually very similar today. There are 5 countries in the world today that still practice stoning, okay? Now, when you would stone someone, the point was it was always death, okay? In the end, it was always death. And people tend to think today, when they think about stoning, they kind of like to compare it to a firing squad. And, I guess that kind of makes sense, projectiles going at the person that's being executed. But they're actually pretty different. So, the point of a firing squad, people die pretty quickly. If the bullet doesn't kill you right away, you die of shock, and, it happens pretty quick. Now, from those five countries in the world today that do practice stoning, I read the statistic online, and I'm inclined to think it's true. I don't know how they got this statistic. It's pretty messed up. But they said the average amount of time it takes for somebody to die when they're being stoned to death is between 10 and 20 minutes. Can you imagine this? So you're probably wondering, like, oh man, if I got hit with enough rocks in like 1 minute, I'd be dead. But they used to do this thing where they would deliberately, to keep people alive and in as much pain as possible, as stoning was a form of torture, by the way, if you hadn't known. There was crucifixion, stoning was right below it. And so what they would do is they would hit you below the neck with stones, okay, for let's say 10 minutes, okay? So imagine this. There's a crowd this size in front of you, right? And they're all chucking stones at you, okay? Now imagine what would happen to your body, like as you're just being, like, cracked ribs, you'd be breaking bones, you might get some stones stuck in you, horrible, painful stuff, right? So this was definitely a form of torture. And when the people stoning you felt that you had had enough, what they would do is they then would say, all right, he's had enough, let's go for a headshot, okay? And so they would throw stones at your head until you're dead, and that rhymed. And so they would kill you that way. And at that point, if you get hit with a few in the head, you would die pretty quick. Okay? So here we're at verse 19. Is that still up on the screen? So they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the town, thinking he was dead. Listen, this is a spoiler alert. Okay? It says thinking he was dead. Okay? Paul didn't actually die. Not now anyway. Okay? So thinking he was dead. But as the believers gathered around him, he got up. Okay? Now that's halfway through the verse. Yeah, they stopped halfway through the verse. I told them to do that because I wanted to stop And I wanted to think about this for a second, okay? So here's a guy who has just had stones thrown at him, one of the most painful experiences a human being can experience, right? Just being hit with stones over and over and over again. He's got cracked ribs, he's got broken bones, he's bleeding everywhere. And then they went for the headshot, and they thought he was dead. So some rock must have hit him, and there was like blood gushing out, and they could see the skull. I don't know, his skull was cracked. It was messed up, right? Whatever happened, he was pretty messed up because they thought he was dead, right? And not only did they think he was dead, but then they dragged him out of the town. Now, the passage doesn't say how they dragged him out of the town, but it says they dragged him, okay? So they either just, one guy took his foot, or they tied him behind a horse and dragged him out of town. I don't know what they actually did, but they dragged him out of the town. So now, not only he's got all these lacerations all over his body, and now he's being dragged through the dirt, it's terrible to think about. And so he's in rough shape, right? But he got up. Now, if you were Paul right then, what would be going through your mind? What would you think? What are you going to do next, right? I'm going, first I'd probably go to the hospital if they had one, but they probably didn't. I'd be probably thinking about morphine. I need morphine. Something, it's so painful. But ultimately I'd want to go home. I'd want to go home. You know what, God, I did what you asked me to do. People threw stones at me. Clearly they don't want to hear this right now. They just want to offer sacrifices to Barnabas. That's fine. But they didn't stone Barnabas. I don't understand that, by the way. That was a question I had. So here's Paul, though, and see, in our mind, we think, when we face a difficulty that big, when people want to kill us, it's over. It's over at that point. And it's not even when people want to kill us. It's when our marriages are a mess. It's when we have the urge to take part in that addiction again, whatever our addiction might be. It's when we get that credit card bill and we just put it in the shredder. I'm not paying that. We just give up. So now here's Paul, right? And it says Paul got up, okay? And now the rest of the verse. And he went back into the town. The next day, he left with Barnabas for Derbe, which was right next door. After preaching the good news at Derbe and making many disciples, Paul and Barnabas returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch of Pisidia, where they strengthened the believers. They encouraged them to continue in the faith, reminding them that we must suffer many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. What the heck was Paul thinking? Right? So they just stoned him. He narrowly, very narrow, like in an Indiana Jones way, he narrowly avoids death, right? And he's hurting. He's probably in a lot of pain. And he goes back into Lystra, where the crowd stoned him. He probably heals up a little bit. In a few days, he goes back to Derbe, which is next door, and he preaches the gospel there. And it says he was pretty successful after preaching the good news in Derbe and making many disciples. All right? So people are listening to this guy, right? They're like, man, he must really believe what he's preaching. I watched him get stoned the other day, and he came back to give this message to us. So he's turning this bad into good. And here's the craziest part of this whole thing. Paul and Barnabas returned to Lystra and Iconium. Bam, bam, bam. Luke returned to the Death Star, right? Like this is crazy stuff. And where they strengthened the believers, they encouraged them to continue in the faith, reminding them that we must suffer many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. So we know Paul was thinking a lot differently than we were, right? Because no one today, in their right mind would do something like this. Am I right about this? Can I get amen? Raise your hands. Yeah, that's right. All right, good. That's what I thought. So, just really quick note, as a teacher, sometimes you're like, all right, am I the only one that's thinking this right now? Hope that's not the case here, because, if you're all like martyrs sitting here, this would be really awkward. Hope that's not the case. So we know that Paul was thinking differently, because, right, no one else in their right mind would have done that in this situation. So here's the question we need to ask. What was Paul thinking? What exactly was Paul thinking when he made the decision to go to stand up and not run away, to stand up and go back into Lystra? to go back into Iconium, right? What made him want to do that? So, ultimately, really the only one in the end who can tell us what Paul was thinking is Paul. And there's this section in a letter that Paul wrote to some of his friends later on in his life to the church in Rome that I think really hits the nail on the head, and I think it really shows us what he really must have been thinking in this situation. And we're going to read this slowly. Here's what it says. This is Romans 8, by the way. Can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or are persecuted, or hungry, or destitute, or in danger, or threatened with death? As the scriptures say, for your sake we're being killed every day, we're being slaughtered like sheep. No. Despite all of these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loved us. So we have that little section there. Does it mean Christ no longer loves us if we're threatened with death, right? And here he's saying, no. Despite all of these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loves us. And he's not done yet. He continues. And I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither death, nor life, neither angels, nor demons, neither our fears for today, nor our worries about tomorrow, not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky above or in the earth below. Indeed, nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord. That's pretty epic stuff, right? So this is where Paul's mind is at. He's convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God. That God's greater than death. He's greater than life. He's greater than angels. He's greater than demons. He's greater than fears about today. He's greater than worries about tomorrow. And he says there's nothing in creation that can match God. God is bigger than all of those things. So this is where Paul's mind is at when he's making that decision. When Paul faces a problem, I'm guessing he goes back to this. He goes back, you know what? My God is greater. You know what our series is called right now? Our God is greater. And it's really true. So I'm going to ask you this morning. Where's your mind at? Where's your mind at? When the credit card bill comes in the mail, and you're like, man, I can't pay this. Where's your mind at? When you get in that horrible fight with your spouse, where's your mind at? When you get that urge to give into the addiction again, where's your mind at? When you wake up in the morning and your problems are right there, and I could go through a really big list of things, but whatever that problem is, I know you have a problem in your mind that you're thinking of right now. Where is your mind at when you think about that problem? Are you only thinking about how big the problem is? Or are you also considering God, who's bigger than that problem? So here's what I know this morning, and here's where the application is going to come in. The way you think is the way that you will live. It's true for Paul, and it's true for us. I'm going to say it again. The way you think is the way that you will live. Now, don't understand me here if you think that there's going to be $1 million in your bank account if you go on your Bank of America app right now. Unless you already had it, it's probably not going to happen, okay? But, the way you think is the way that you live. And that's so true, and I've found it to be true personally. And here's what that means for us. If you think like God is bigger than your problem, if your thought process revolves around God being bigger than whatever comes your way, you're going to live that way. And you're gonna never give up, and you're gonna keep trying, and you're gonna keep trying new things, you're gonna keep trying new ways. And more often than not, I think you're gonna defeat your problem, or God's just gonna use that problem for good in general, good in your life, good in someone else's life. Only good can come from your thought process revolving around God being bigger. If you think God is bigger, you're going to live like God is bigger. And if you're thinking God's bigger and that credit card bill comes in the mail now, you're thinking, God, I know you're greater than this problem. And I know you want me to steward my finances wisely. So you know what? I'm going to go to that financial peace class that Steve and Corinne invited me to. And I'm going to learn how to get out of debt. And when you go through that horrible fight with your spouse, listen, God, I know that you're greater than this, you know, and it doesn't feel that way, and everything inside of me is, you know, or almost everything inside of me is telling me to just run the opposite direction and to give up on this marriage. But I know that you're greater than this problem, and I know you have called me to have a great and God-honoring marriage. So, you know what? I'm going to try something new. I'm going to attack this thing from a different angle. I'm going to seek godly wisdom somewhere else. We're going to go to marital counseling. We're going to figure this thing out. So, so here's the thing I know about you. And we're going to wrap up in a minute here, so I'm going to call the band up. I know that you came here this morning, and maybe you weren't thinking about, you know, a big problem on your way in the door. But at some point in this message, I hope you know, some problem that you've been wrestling with, you know, in the past, something you're currently facing. I hope something, you know, came up in your mind, and you're trying to already think differently about it. And I really do believe this could be a big turning point for a lot of you. When you walk out those doors and you think, you know, all right, here's the problem. Now, where's my mind at? You know, is it on how big just the problem is, or am I also considering how big God is? You know, and think about what could happen if this works out. Your spouse could be married to somebody who isn't giving up, who's really trying to make it work, and who wants that God-honoring relationship. Your finances could finally be stewarded by somebody who knows, you know, I'm not giving up, and I'm going to figure this out. You know, I'm gonna seek additional income. I'm gonna go to financial peace. I'm gonna get everything lined up. And I really do think that this idea of where's my mind at can really change things in our lives. And ultimately, I think our community could be changed. So let's pray together this morning and just ask God for His blessing as we go out and we live this out in our daily lives.